Richard Pryor's forgotten directorial debut hides bizarre production secrets, from jazz legends making rare acting appearances to haunting continuity errors involving time-traveling cars. Behind this raw autobiographical film lies a stranger-than-fiction story of therapeutic filmmaking, mysterious on-set tensions, and one of Hollywood's most brutally honest self-portraits that audiences weren't ready to see. Fact 1. Pryor's only directorial effort was filmed as therapy. Richard Pryor didn't just make JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling as another movie project. He made it because he literally felt like he had no other choice. In 1986, when the New York Amsterdam News asked him why he decided to create this film, Pryor gave one of the most brutally honest answers in Hollywood history. He described the entire filmmaking process as an exorcism, saying he needed to make this movie to go on with his life after nearly dying from freebasing cocaine just 6 years earlier. This wasn't your typical director's answer about artistic vision or creative passion. Pryor admitted he felt compelled to make the film as a way of confronting and purging his own demons. He told the interviewer that making JoJo Dancer accomplished two specific purposes. It served as an exorcism for him personally, and it allowed him to create a dramatic story that paralleled his real life. The comedian was remarkably direct about his motivation, stating that there was nothing else he could do except make this film if he wanted to move forward and hopefully create what he considered the best work of his life from that point on. What makes this even more unusual is that Pryor was willing to expose his darkest moments to millions of viewers as part of this therapeutic process. He later reflected on watching the finished film and asking himself why he showed people such raw and painful parts of his story, but he insisted he had no choice in the matter. This was something he needed to do, not for entertainment or commercial success, but for his own survival and healing. The fact that this deeply personal therapy session became his one and only narrative feature film as a director makes it one of the strangest and most vulnerable projects in cinema history. Fact 2. The film was shot at actual locations. From Pryor's childhood, most biographical films use convenient stand-in locations that merely resemble where the real events took place. But Richard Pryor took a much more intense and personal approach with JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. The earlier parts of the film were actually shot in Pryor's genuine hometown of Peoria, Illinois, meaning the comedian physically returned to the real streets, buildings, and neighborhoods where his traumatic childhood unfolded decades earlier. This decision becomes even more striking when you consider what Pryor's childhood in Peoria actually involved. He grew up in his grandmother's brothel, surrounded by sex workers, including his own mother, and experienced abuse and instability that would shape the rest of his life. By choosing to film in the actual locations where these painful events occurred, Pryor wasn't just recreating his past. He was literally standing in the exact places where his trauma happened while directing actors to portray those same traumatic moments. What makes this choice particularly unusual is that the film itself doesn't even acknowledge Peoria by name. In the movie's story, the character JoJo Dancer is said to have grown up in Ohio, not Illinois, creating this strange situation where Pryor filmed his fictionalized autobiography in the real locations but under a false geographic identity. The authenticity of the setting was clearly important enough to Pryor that he felt compelled to go back home and confront these spaces directly, even though he wasn't planning to credit Peoria on screen. Peoria itself has a complicated relationship with its most famous son, with some residents feeling the comedian was a controversial representative for their city. Despite this tension, Pryor chose to bring his cast and crew to his actual childhood haunts, turning his hometown into an unwitting participant in his cinematic exorcism and making JoJo Dancer one of the most geographically authentic biographical films ever made. Fact 3. Two jazz legends made rare acting appearances. JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling features two of the most respected names in jazz history in significant acting roles, which is particularly unusual because neither Carmen McRae nor Billy Eckstine were known for their work in front of movie cameras. Carmen McRae, who played JoJo's grandmother in the film, was a legendary jazz vocalist and pianist who had built her entire career around music rather than acting. Similarly, Billy Eckstine, cast as the veteran showman Johnny Barnett, was a groundbreaking singer and bandleader who helped pioneer the bebop movement and influenced countless musicians throughout his career. What makes their casting even more remarkable is that Richard Pryor specifically chose these two performers because of their personal connection to his real-life story. Pryor publicly stated that McRae and Eckstine were among dozens of performers who had actually helped him get started working as a comic in the Midwest during his early struggling years. So their appearances in the film weren't just celebrity cameos, but genuine tributes to people who had supported him when he needed it most. Despite having virtually no experience as film actors, both jazz legends delivered performances that caught critics completely by surprise. The Pittsburgh Courier specifically highlighted their work, noting that stunning performances were offered by a couple of legends who had earned their distinction in another art form entirely. The review singled out McRae and Eckstine by name, praising how they brought authenticity and emotional weight to their roles even though they were stepping far outside their usual domain of expertise. Their presence in the film adds another layer to the movie's unusual production, as Pryor surrounded himself not with seasoned character actors, but with real musicians from his past who brought genuine history and personal connection to their scenes, making JoJo Dancer feel less like traditional Hollywood filmmaking and more like a deeply personal reunion. Fact 4. A 1980s car time traveled to the 1940s scenes. One of the most glaring mistakes in JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, involves a vehicle that had no business being anywhere near the scenes it appears in. During the sequences showing young JoJo as a child, which are supposed to be set in the 1940s, a 1980s Lincoln Town Car somehow made it past everyone on set and appears not just once but twice in the finished film, creating an impossible anachronism that sharp-eyed viewers immediately noticed. The first appearance of this time-traveling automobile happens during close-up shots of young JoJo when he looks back at his older self sitting at a corner store. If you watch carefully over the young character's shoulder, you can clearly see the modern Lincoln Town Car in the background, looking completely out of place in what's supposed to be a scene from several decades earlier. The mistake becomes even more obvious in the second appearance, where the same 1980s vehicle is briefly visible parked directly in front of the family house just a few minutes later in the film, right when young JoJo returns home and gets scolded by his grandmother for playing on the lawn. This kind of continuity error is particularly surprising, given that Richard Pryor was serving as the film's director and had complete creative control over the production. The fact that the same wrong-era car appears twice suggests it may have belonged to a crew member or local resident in Peoria where they were filming, and nobody caught the mistake during shooting or editing. For a film that was meant to be such a deeply personal and carefully crafted autobiography, having a modern luxury sedan sitting in plain view during childhood flashback scenes stands out as one of those production oversights that's impossible to unsee once you notice it. Fact 5. The Spirit's wardrobe malfunction in cable versions. When JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling aired on cable television in its early broadcasts, viewers got to see something that theatrical audiences never noticed, an embarrassing wardrobe mistake that completely broke the illusion of one of the film's key supernatural moments. The problem came down to the technical difference between how the movie was filmed and how it was presented on cable, which used what's called an opened-up Super 35 frame that showed more of the image on the sides than what moviegoers saw in theaters. In the film's story, JoJo's spiritual alter ego separates from his Bailey-burned physical body and walks around as what's supposed to be a naked spirit observing his own life. During the scene where this spirit character walks toward a limousine, the theatrical version was carefully framed so that when you saw him from behind, it looked like Richard Pryor was completely nude, which made sense for a disembodied soul. However, the cable broadcasts revealed what the theatrical framing had cleverly hidden. When the camera showed Pryor from the front during this same sequence, viewers could clearly see that he was actually only bare-chested and was wearing a full pair of jeans the entire time. This means the whole naked spirit effect was just a trick of camera angles that only worked when the frame was cropped to theatrical proportions. Once cable television opened up that frame to fill more of the screen, the illusion completely fell apart, and audiences could see that the supposedly nude, ghostly figure was actually walking around in denim pants. It's the kind of technical mistake that probably seemed fine during filming when everyone assumed the theatrical framing would be the only version anyone would ever see. Fact 6. It was made under a historic $40 million Columbia deal. Joe Dancer, Your Life is Calling wasn't just another movie project for Richard Pryor. It was the centerpiece of a groundbreaking deal that made history in Hollywood. In 1983, 3 years before the film's release, Pryor became the first major black talent to sign a production company deal with Columbia Pictures, and the contract was worth an astronomical $40 million spread across 5 years. This wasn't just an acting contract where he'd show up and perform. This was a deal that gave him his own production company and genuine creative control over the projects he wanted to make. The significance of this deal can't be overstated, especially considering the era and the ongoing struggles for representation and power that black artists faced in Hollywood during the 1980s. Pryor had reached such a level of box office success with comedies like Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and The Toy that Columbia was willing to give him the kind of autonomy and financial backing that was virtually unheard of for performers of color at that time. This made him not just a star appearing in studio films, but an actual producer with the ability to greenlight projects and make major creative decisions. Joe Dancer represented Pryor's attempt to use this unprecedented power to make something deeply personal rather than another commercial comedy. Instead of playing it safe with the kind of broad humor that had made him wealthy, he chose to direct and star in a raw autobiographical drama about drug addiction and self-destruction. The fact that he used this historic deal to make such an uncommercial and therapeutically motivated film shows just how important the project was to him, even if it meant potentially squandering the goodwill and financial opportunity that Columbia had given him. Fact 7. The soundtrack featured a disturbing, soul-cleansing track. The soundtrack album for Joe Dancer, Your Life is Calling, contains one of the most unsettling pieces of music ever included on a movie soundtrack, and it's disturbing for reasons that go far beyond just the musical composition itself. Legendary jazz pianist Herbie Hancock composed the score for the film, creating an eclectic mix that ranged from funk to blues to gospel, but one track in particular stands out for its haunting and deeply uncomfortable nature. A piece called Bass Behavior/Burn Ward that takes the soundtrack into genuinely dark territory. What makes this track so disturbing is that it doesn't just provide background music for the film's most traumatic scene, it actually incorporates audio clips directly from the movie's self-immolation sequence, where the character Jojo decides to, as the track description puts it, cleanse his soul. This means that listeners who purchased the soundtrack album could hear dialogue and sound effects from the moment when the protagonist sets himself on fire while freebasing cocaine, all mixed together with Hancock's jazz instrumentation. One reviewer who owned the soundtrack specifically singled out this track as the most disturbing piece on the entire album, which is saying something considering the heavy emotional content throughout the rest of the music. The decision to include actual audio from such a graphic and tragic scene on a commercially released soundtrack album is extremely unusual, as most movie soundtracks stick to instrumental scores or popular songs rather than incorporating disturbing dialogue and sound effects. The fact that this track exists at all shows just how committed everyone involved was to making Joe Dancer an unflinchingly honest document of Pryor's near-death experience, even if it meant creating a listening experience that many people would find genuinely difficult to sit through. Fact 8. Pryor couldn't distinguish reality from fiction. In one of the most revealing and unsettling comments Richard Pryor ever made about Joe Dancer, Your Life is Calling, he admitted that making the film left him genuinely confused about what was real and what was fictional. Pryor stated that throughout the entire picture, he felt like he was walking a narrow edge between his own reality and Jojo's fantasy, and then added something even more troubling. He said he still wasn't sure which was which even after the film was completed. This statement is particularly striking because JoJo Dancer was already being marketed and discussed as a thinly veiled autobiography, with the character's experiences closely mirroring Pryor's actual life events. The comedian had grown up in a brothel run by his grandmother just like JoJo, had struggled with addiction just like JoJo, and had set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine just like JoJo. Given how closely the fictional story tracked with documented facts from Pryor's real life, the idea that he couldn't separate his actual memories from the dramatized version he created for the film suggests just how psychologically intense the filmmaking process must have been for him. What makes this admission even more significant is that Pryor wasn't just an actor performing someone else's script. He was the writer, director, producer, and star all at once, meaning he had complete control over every aspect of how his own story was being told. Despite having that level of authorship and authority over the material, he still found himself unable to maintain a clear boundary between the truth of his lived experience and the fictional elements he had invented for dramatic purposes. This blurring of reality and fantasy during such a personal project speaks to just how deeply the making of this film affected Pryor's mental and emotional state. Fact 9. It features Dennis Farina's early film role. Long before Dennis Farina became a familiar face in crime dramas and gangster movies, he appeared in JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling in a small role as a character named Freddie, and the timing of this appearance makes it particularly notable in his career trajectory. Farina had spent 18 years working as a police officer in the Chicago Police Department's burglary division, serving from 1967 all the way until 1985. And he had only recently left the force to pursue acting as a full-time career when he landed this role in Pryor's film. The transition from real police work to playing cops and criminals on screen was just beginning for Farina when JoJo Dancer was being made in 1986. He had started getting small acting opportunities while still working as an officer, initially serving as a police consultant for director Michael Mann, who then began casting him in minor roles. This consulting work had sparked Farina's interest in performing, but it wasn't until he was confident that acting could actually support him and his family that he made the decision to leave his law enforcement career behind for good. What's interesting about Farina's appearance in this film is that it came at such a pivotal moment in his life, right when he was making the risky choice to abandon a stable career with the police department to chase what must have seemed like an unlikely dream of becoming a professional actor. Within a few years of appearing in JoJo Dancer, Farina would go on to land much bigger roles in films like Midnight Run and eventually become a television star on shows like Crime Story and Law and Order. But in 1986, he was still very much an unknown quantity, taking his first real steps into the entertainment industry. Fact 10. The film's box office failure ended Pryor's directing career. JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, had the unfortunate distinction of being both Richard Pryor's directorial debut and his directorial finale, as the film's disappointing performance at the box office permanently ended any plans he had to continue working behind the camera. Despite being made under the protection of that historic $40 million deal with Columbia Pictures, which should have given Pryor some cushion to take creative risks, the movie failed to connect with audiences commercially and was described by multiple sources as a box office disappointment when it was released in 1986. The financial failure was particularly crushing because Pryor had poured so much of himself into the project, using his unprecedented creative control to make something deeply personal rather than another crowd-pleasing comedy. He had taken on the roles of writer, director, producer, and star simultaneously, giving himself complete authorship over this autobiographical story. But moviegoers who were used to seeing him in broad comedies like Stir Crazy and Brewster's Millions weren't interested in watching him confront his drug addiction and near-death experience in such a raw and unflinching way. After JoJo Dancer failed to perform at theaters, Pryor never attempted to direct another narrative feature film for the rest of his career. He continued acting in movies throughout the late 1980s and into the 90s, appearing in films like See No Evil, Hear No Evil and Harlem Nights, but he stayed in front of the camera rather than behind it. The only other directing credit he received was for his 1983 stand-up concert film Richard Pryor, Here and Now. But that was before JoJo Dancer and was a completely different type of project that simply involved filming his stage performance rather than crafting a dramatic narrative. Fact 11. Pryor literally called it his exorcism. Richard Pryor's choice of words when describing JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, reveals just how seriously he viewed the filmmaking process as something far beyond typical entertainment production. When the New York Amsterdam News directly asked him why he decided to make a movie called JoJo Dancer, and whether it was a form of exorcism, whether he wanted to do it for drama's sake, or whether he hoped to win some awards, Pryor's answer was remarkably direct. He said he did it for two of those three reasons, specifically stating that it was like an exorcism for him and also a drama. The fact that Pryor used the word exorcism without any hesitation or qualification is significant because exorcisms are traditionally about driving out evil spirits or purging demonic forces from a person or place. By applying this term to his filmmaking process, Pryor was essentially saying that he viewed JoJo Dancer as a spiritual cleansing ritual that would allow him to expel the destructive forces that had nearly killed him. This wasn't just a metaphor he was using casually. He genuinely seemed to believe that making this film was a necessary act of purification that would help him move forward with his life after coming so close to death from his drug addiction. What makes this even more striking is that Pryor ruled out the third option entirely, making it clear he wasn't doing this project in hopes of winning awards or critical acclaim. The commercial and artistic success of the film wasn't his primary motivation. He was literally trying to save himself by confronting his past on camera. This puts JoJo Dancer in a very unusual category of films where the creative process itself was more important than the finished product, making it less of a movie and more of a documented act of psychological and spiritual self-rescue. Fact 12, it premiered same year Pryor was diagnosed with MS. The year 1986 marked a devastating turning point in Richard Pryor's life that went far beyond the commercial disappointment of his directorial debut, as it was also the year he received a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, a progressive degenerative disease of the nervous system that would fundamentally change everything about his career and personal life. The timing of this diagnosis in the same year that JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling was released creates a haunting coincidence, as Pryor was making a film about confronting his mortality and past traumas while simultaneously facing a completely different and unexpected health crisis that would ultimately prove even more life-altering than his drug addiction had been. Multiple sclerosis is a condition where the immune system attacks the protective covering of nerves, leading to communication problems between the brain and the rest of the body. And in Pryor's case, the disease would progressively worsen over the years that followed. The impact on his career was particularly cruel because so much of Pryor's comedic genius relied on his incredible physical expressiveness and his ability to embody different characters through movement and gesture. As the disease advanced through the 1990s, it curtailed both his personal appearances and his gift for physical comedy, eventually confining him to a wheelchair and making it increasingly difficult for him to perform. By the time the 1990s arrived, audiences saw very little of Pryor as the disease took its toll, though he did make a courageous television comeback in 1995 when he guest starred on Chicago Hope, playing a character who was also suffering from multiple sclerosis. That performance earned him an Emmy nomination and showed he could still deliver powerful work despite his physical limitations. Fact 13. Co-writer Paul Mooney had allegedly complicated history. The making of JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, may have been even more emotionally fraught than audiences realized, as allegations surfaced years later suggesting that the collaborative relationship between Richard Pryor and his co-writer Paul Mooney was deteriorating during the film's production in 1986. Paul Mooney had been one of Pryor's closest collaborators for years. writing material for his groundbreaking stand-up albums and working as the head writer for The Richard Pryor Show. But according to claims made much later by Pryor's former bodyguard Rashawn Khan, their friendship and working relationship had become fragile by the time they were making this film together. Khan alleged in a 2019 interview that tensions existed between the two men during JoJo Dancer's production due to personal betrayals that had damaged their relationship. And he claimed that their professional partnership was never the same afterward. These allegations didn't surface publicly until more than 3 decades after the film was made, which means audiences who watched JoJo Dancer in theaters had no idea that the two men co-writing this intensely personal screenplay might have been dealing with serious interpersonal conflicts behind the scenes while trying to craft Pryor's autobiographical story. It's important to note that these claims remain disputed and controversial, with various parties offering different accounts of what actually happened between Pryor and Mooney during this period. What is documented and undeniable is that Mooney and Pryor did continue working together on JoJo Dancer, despite whatever tensions may or may not have existed, and both men are credited as co-writers on the finished film along with Rocco Urbischi. The exact nature of their relationship during production remains a matter of conflicting accounts and unverified allegations rather than established fact. Fact 14. The film was too rough for the super slick mid-80s. One of the most frequently cited reasons for JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling's commercial failure was that the film felt fundamentally out of step with the visual style and aesthetic expectations of mid-1980s Hollywood. Multiple critics and reviewers observed that the movie was shot and structured more like a film from the 1970s, rather than something that belonged in the era of Top Gun and Back to the Future. And this deliberate stylistic choice made it feel dated and rough in ways that confused and alienated audiences who were expecting something more polished and contemporary. One particularly insightful review specifically pointed out that the film was too rough for the super slick mid-80s, noting that it had a gritty, unvarnished quality that clashed with the glossy production values and MTV-influenced visual style that dominated Hollywood during that decade. The 1980s were all about high-concept blockbusters with sleek cinematography and rapid editing, but Pryor's film moved at a different pace and had a raw, almost documentary-like feel that harked back to the more naturalistic filmmaking of the previous decade. This wasn't an accident or a mistake. It appeared to be a conscious artistic decision on Pryor's part to make something that prioritized emotional authenticity over visual flash. The problem was that audiences in 1986 weren't necessarily looking for that kind of stripped-down, emotionally brutal experience. When they went to see a Richard Pryor movie, they wanted the polished Hollywood entertainment they'd grown accustomed to, not something that felt deliberately rough and uncomfortable. The film's gritty aesthetic might be appreciated more today when 1970s-style filmmaking has been reappraised and celebrated, but at the time of its release, it simply made JoJo Dancer feel like it belonged to a different era entirely. Fact 15. It only became a cult classic. Decades later, JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, spent nearly 4 decades languishing in obscurity and poor-quality home video releases before finally receiving the restoration and critical reassessment it deserved. After the film was largely dismissed by critics and ignored by audiences when it premiered in 1986, it essentially disappeared from cultural consciousness for years, with the only North American home video release being a low-quality DVD from Mill Creek Entertainment that came out in 2002 and failed to do justice to the film's cinematography or emotional power. For anyone who wanted to watch JoJo Dancer in decent quality during the 2000s and 2010s, they were essentially out of luck unless they could track down an old VHS tape or settle for that subpar DVD transfer. The film was in desperate need of proper restoration work, but it took until 2023 for Sony to finally create a 4K restoration that could show the movie the way it was meant to be seen. Even after that restoration was completed, it still took another 2 years before the film received a proper premium release when the Criterion Collection, known for releasing important and culturally significant films in high-quality editions, finally added JoJo Dancer to their catalog in January of 2025. This means that the film came out nearly 40 years after its original theatrical debut before it was available in a format that truly honored Richard Pryor's vision and allowed new audiences to discover it properly. The Criterion release brought renewed critical attention to the movie, with reviewers who had never seen it before praising its raw honesty and emotional depth, helping to establish JoJo Dancer as a cult classic and an important piece of autobiographical filmmaking that had been unfairly overlooked for most of its existence.